My name is Margaret, though most people just call me Maggie. I grew up in a quiet Midwestern town where family and tradition meant everything. For years, I thought I had built the perfect life. I had a husband, Paul, who had been my partner since college, and a son, Ethan, who had been the light of our lives since the moment he was born. We weren't a rich family, but our home was always full of warmth, laughter, and love. Ethan was a bright boy from the start, charming, clever, and always good with people. Teachers adored him, neighbors trusted him, and his friends often looked up to him. Paul and I were proud, sometimes even too proud, of how well we had raised him. But sometimes life has a way of humbling you, of reminding you that even the strongest families can be shaken to their core. This is not an easy story for me to tell. It's about betrayal, about lines that should never be crossed, and about the painful reality that sometimes the people you love most can hurt you the deepest. But it's also a story about forgiveness, about the way broken hearts can heal, and about the resilience of family when it chooses love over anger. It all began during Ethan's final year of high school. He was 17 then, on the cusp of adulthood, restless, and eager to prove himself. He had always been close to me, sometimes a little too close. Paul worked long hours at his accounting firm, and that often left Ethan and me together at home. We cooked meals together, stayed up late watching movies, and sometimes had conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. At first, I thought it was natural. Mothers and sons can share a bond that's unshakable. But as Ethan grew older, I started to sense something shifting in the way he looked at me, in the way he acted. His compliments became more personal, more loaded. He would tell me I looked beautiful, not in the casual way a son might praise his mom, but with a tone that made me uncomfortable. I brushed it off, convincing myself I was reading too much into it. Teenagers are complicated after all. Their emotions are confusing even to themselves. But one night, a line was crossed that changed everything. It was late, around midnight. Paul was working on a project and wouldn't be home until the next morning. Ethan and I had been watching an old romantic drama, and when the credits rolled, the room fell silent. I could feel his eyes on me, lingering too long. When I turned to tell him goodnight, he leaned closer than he should have. The world seemed to freeze in that moment. My heart raced, my thoughts scrambled, and every maternal instinct inside me screamed that this was wrong. I pulled back immediately, my voice firm, my hands trembling as I told him that what he was feeling, what he had tried to do, was not love, but confusion. He had mistaken the comfort of closeness for something else entirely. Ethan's face turned pale as he realized what had just happened. He stammered apologies, his voice breaking, his hands shaking. "Mom, I'm sorry, I don't know why, He couldn't even finish the sentence before tears filled his eyes. I wanted to be angry, but more than anything, I felt heartbreak. Not for myself, but for my son. He was a child, still learning, still stumbling through the messy journey of figuring out emotions, relationships, and boundaries. This was not about desire. This was about confusion, loneliness, and immaturity. That night, I held him as he cried. I reminded him that he was loved, but that love between a mother and son had a sacred boundary that could never, ever be crossed again. We talked for hours, and for the first time in years, he truly listened. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I carried the weight of that night in silence. Should I tell Paul? Should I protect Ethan's reputation and keep it between us? The guilt gnawed at me. I worried constantly that I had failed as a mother, that I had somehow caused this by being too close, too affectionate, too much of a confidant. But then something remarkable happened. Ethan took responsibility. He asked to see a counselor, admitting that he needed help understanding his emotions and learning about boundaries. It was one of the bravest things I had ever seen him do. When Paul eventually found out, because secrets in a family never stay hidden forever, his initial reaction was fury. His voice shook with anger, and for a moment, I thought he might never forgive either of us. But then I watched as Paul's anger turned to sorrow, and sorrow into something softer. He realized that this was not about betrayal in the way most people might think. It was about a boy making a mistake, a family facing a fracture, and a choice about how to heal. We decided to face it together. Therapy sessions became part of our weekly routine, not just for Ethan, but for all of us. Those sessions opened wounds, but also paved the way for healing. Ethan learned to separate love from affection, closeness from intimacy, and respect from desire. Paul learned to let go of blame and lean into forgiveness. And I learned to stop carrying guilt for something I didn't cause. Over time, Ethan blossomed again into the boy we had always known him to be: kind, responsible, and full of promise. The shadow of that night didn't disappear entirely, but it no longer defined him or us. We became stronger, more honest, and more compassionate as a family. Years have passed since then. Ethan is now a young man in his 20s, studying psychology of all things. He once told me he chose that path because he never wanted anyone else to feel as lost and confused as he had that night. He wanted to help others untangle the complicated web of emotions before they made mistakes that could change their lives. Looking back, I realized that what could have destroyed our family became the very thing that bound us tighter together. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about choosing love in the face of pain, choosing healing over punishment, and believing that even broken people can grow into something whole again. So when I tell this story, I don't tell it with shame anymore. I tell it with the hope that others might see that no family is perfect, that mistakes happen, sometimes unthinkable ones. But with love, accountability, and forgiveness, even the deepest wounds can heal. And I tell it because I am proud of my son, not for what he did, but for who he became after. A man who faced his flaws, sought help, and transformed his pain into purpose. A man who taught me, in his own broken way, that healing is always possible.